Hi, I'm Jen. Welcome to my channel. Today's video I want to talk about emotions. So whenever my emotions are tied into something, that tells me I'm relying on somebody else for something that I have not developed within myself. And then I also look back on my childhood and where that was not created for me and developed within me from my parents. And so it can really lead a pattern for you if you pay attention to it and what you're looking for. So I use a lot of the way I find this out for me, the way I get information and clarity is I look at my life and I compare it to where my parents are. And my parents have either achieved something or they haven't, right? And so I have to look there because that's the environment I was raised in by their belief systems and their action of whatever misbeliefs and excuses and codependencies that were there. And so if my parents couldn't take the time in my life from the 0 to 5 years to develop in me these like foundational things like accountability, discipline, grace, patience, nurturing, kindness, all these things that you need in order to grow. I didn't get those. And so like if I didn't get them in my 0 to 5 and I don't see that in my parents now, there's a chance that they never did that for me, right? And so now that makes me as an adult and I have children that there's a good chance that I didn't create that for my children either. And so now I'm having to learn it for myself. And there's a lot of emotions tied up in all of that because for me, there's a lot of grieving and frustration. So like I had to grieve what I didn't receive, but now at the ripe old age of 47, now I have to try to learn these things to create a successful life. And part of that involved developing self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, but also self-love and holding my line in situations and dynamics where I knew that it was not equally yoked. And this is workplaces, this is relationships, this is romantic, this is platonic, this is people, this is strangers. This is just me advocating for myself because as a child I was not taught how to not only advocate, but I was like suppressed and diminished and neglected and isolated instead of like uplifted, encouraged, taught, and allowed me to grow into the human that I was meant to be. And so like now as an adult over the last few years, I've had to try to uncover that and process that. So now I've developed tools within myself where I can recognize if I'm feeling an emotionality about something, it's because I feel like that that situation, that dynamic, whether it be it could be a workplace, it could be a belief system, it could be a person, it could be a group, it could be something that I tie myself to in a codependent sort of tethered sort of way. And so I learned the more I sit in that emotion and ask myself, why am I feeling that way? What was I looking for? What was I needing? What was I expecting from that situation or that person? I had to look for one, how I was overgiving and under receiving, but I also had to recognize where that was never on the table. Those people aren't capable of providing that for me. And also I need to learn how I can provide that for myself. So now and a lot of people will like state, oh, being overly independent is unsafe too, or that's unhealthy. And I'm like, you know what? That's you got to take what you got to take. I can accept help in certain areas, but when I recognize that environment is actually unhealthy for me, that's a sign for me to keep pushing and move forward and not settle in that. So if you watch my previous video about settling, this ties into that, where I recognize there's an emotional reaction to kind of where I wasn't getting what I wanted. And so part of that was because not only was I settling and kind of settling in myself instead of like growing myself, but there's also like thinking that I was looking for a partnership and maybe a friendship or some sort of even just a friendly face without sort of without underlying intentions, where I was disappointed where that was not, that person, those people, that situation was still dishonest. And then I had to look at myself where I was being dishonest. And so like it's a learning curve because, there's a lot of programs that I was taught when I was younger that really kept me stuck up in my head, which means it's keeping me out of my body. And if I'm out of my body, I can't move. and I can't do the things that I want to do. That so for me, when I believe like play, no matter what age, like I think every adult and child needs a level of play. And when you've been raised in a certain environment where there's no play, like you know, stress, overwhelm, abuse, all these things that really suppress your play aspect, your joy aspect, it's, you know, people say, well, just go do this, go exercise, just go do it. And it's like, well, it's not that easy, because it's not just like you have, think of like a pile of laundry, and you got to find something at the bottom of that. You got to remove all these things from the laundry before you can find that marble of joy underneath the pile of dirty laundry, right? And so like, whose dirty laundry? When you're pulling this dirty laundry, like, those aren't my pants, that's not my shirt, this isn't my comforter, this is everyone else's stuff, like piled on top of my marble of joy, right? And so it gets what I had to also learn was like this pile on of dirty laundry was like emotional manipulation and you know, mental abuse, where people were trying to, and this is like, people are like, oh, we're just finding this stuff out. Like, this has been going on since the beginning of time. It's just, you know, I think now as a society we consider ourselves civilized because we don't act like the people in medieval days, but in reality we've just costumed it up, we've just covered it up, we've just done it differently. It's still happening. You know, emotional and mental abuse are very hard to pinpoint and prove, because it's not like a black eye or, you know, a verbal explosion in front of a number of people, but like, I've seen that, and people are still write it off. I've been in workplaces where, you know, I had an older lady emotionally dump on the rest of the employees, and like, it was just written up as like me having an issue with her, but no one else was standing up to her, no one else was complaining about it, because it was their norm. And I knew, because of the work that I did, that that was not healthy, and that it affected the way I would move about in my work at that workplace. And so like, when a manager and a boss can't recognize that and doesn't want to do anything about it, I had to recognize that boss, that head, that parent of the household was not educated and aware of that abusive nature. And so like, potentially they could be that way too. And even if they're not that way, which they probably are, they're enabling the behavior. And so like, that whole situation to me would be unsafe. And so like, I've had to remove myself from unsafe environments and people, because I know how it affects me emotionally when I have to sit and tolerate and suppress. And so like, even in these environments where I took it a step further, where I started recognizing it and now I started speaking up on it, that was a whole different reaction, because I'm like, these people were treating me like I'm trouble and not actually recognizing the person who is abusive, because the abusive people are very good at being abusive because they play small. They pay that older lady, like, just because you're old, people assume like you're meek and you can't create damage. Well, you know, she created damage, she created emotional damage, and she was trying to create mental instability by creating like a big display when I was being independent of myself and I didn't require her help anymore. She didn't like that, and she felt threatened that I was so independent, and she wanted people to feel dependent on her and needed. And so like, when that wasn't happening, when I was growing too fast for her comfort and her, you know, needs, then she had to make me feel some sort of way by bringing me down, by trying to humiliate me in front of everybody and creating like a shock. And so the next time I would go to do that same task, which was starting an order by myself, it made me think, it made me pause, and it made me feel like, oh my God, I don't know if I know what I'm doing because of that last experience. So people will get in your head when they do those things. And this was an older lady, she was still in the workplace, and so there are so many things that I had to look at, what was making me feel emotional, and in a way that it's not just like my belief system on like who is dangerous and who is safe, but it was like why am I staying in that environment? Why am I staying in that connection? Why do I feel like I have to stay connected to those people and tolerate this sort of abuse? And I've experienced, like in the last video I talked about, it was like, you know, there are people who don't want to come right out and say things, and they'll lie right to your face. You can over communicate as much as you want, and they'll still lie. And because they have a friendly face, and because you can't prove the lie, you feel like you have to stay connected to these people, because you don't really have a reason to disconnect, because you haven't had like an altercation with them, right? But like, and they're like, well, you know what, like, I'm not lying and like stealing money from your bank account. I'm just lying because I'm not giving you all the information, even when you've stated your situation. But like, that's still damaging and it's still exhausting. And when you've grown up in this environment of fatigue, where you've had to tolerate emotional and mental abuse from childhood, that fatigue really hits you. And so I've realized I can no longer go back into connections and people because these start to make me feel really tired, because I'm required to be the parent and the adult in the room. And like, before it was in my household, and now it's in workplaces, and now it's in the community, where people require you to like pretend like you don't see the bullshit that is like literally metaphorically smeared all over them, and like you're just supposed to pretend like they're a good person when you know they're lying right to your face. These are things are exhausting when you have to tolerate them. And like, at the same time, it's confusing because you're like, dude, it's not that deep. I don't even know you. Like, I was friendly to your face, but that doesn't mean we're friends. And so it's not that deep. And while I can be helpful to everybody, that doesn't mean that that makes us that close. And so some people, because they haven't also developed their own independence within themselves, they're very emotionally codependent on other people and kind of attached. And you can feel that attachment because you were raised in that environment as a child, a toddler, a kid, a teenager. You know, you then got into a marriage, a connection with somebody who, a partner was now like that, and you're still required to do all this work. And so that's where the fatigue comes in with this emotion. It's emotionally draining, and you'll start to feel that. And it's going to be confusing because at first it was started with the abusive person who was angry, and you saw that anger, and you saw their abusive nature, you recognize that. But when you try to move away from that, move to the friendly faces, you're still going to feel that, because it's going to feel exhausting. It's going to feel like a toddler pulling on your sleeve all the time, and you're like confused because this person has a friendlier face than the ones of the past where they were angry and aggressive. And I've also learned a lot of times where I'm just seeing the other side of my father, the one that he showed to the people who didn't know him. And that angry side was the side we got as a family every day, because he felt safe to show it to us, because somehow we relied on him. You know, we had to live under his household. He bought the food. He paid for the house. We had to respect him because we relied on him. And so when you get to a point where now you're more independent, what happens is, like, you get to see the other side, and they have that friendlier face because they're trying to ensnare you in that sort of emotional codependency, where you'll see this where people try to create like a rapport with you. And not only will they try to make you feel bad for them, they'll try to tie you into their trauma, but they'll also try to you know, like I said, be that friendly face all the time. They'll try to play vulnerable. They'll try to play meek, and like they're not a threat. And that's the trap. That's like the honey in the trap. They're trying to get you in so that they can get you in some sort of like codependent dynamic, whether it be like, if you're, a lot of times this happens, it's like, it's when you're down on your luck, it's when you're growing and you're like that seedling instead of that tree, right? Like, you haven't gained numbers, you haven't gained stability, you're just starting to grow. And so this is where I feel a lot of people come in. It's like a vulnerable sector, because you're like, you've recognized the abuse, you've called out the abuse, you haven't been backed about the abuse because nobody wants to believe you, because like what you're saying, they don't want to acknowledge, because they're probably tired, but at the same time, they don't want to acknowledge it. And so like, you're kind of calling out stuff. And like, I had to recognize where like this emotional abuse was exhausting, and it made it really tiring to do anything, because it felt like I had to like carry this around with me everywhere. And so when you start to express the emotions, you also get to acknowledge, like, I started becoming aware of like what my emotions were telling me. And so like, as a revision, like, I'm still not doing enough of this, or maybe I need to do more of this. Maybe I need to rest more because I'm still tired. Maybe I need to grieve more because there's something I'm still doing from my past. And like, people can misinterpret grieving. To me, grieving is like we're sad about a loss of our life, right? And even if this is an individual, but like, if you look at it where, you know, that's kind of entitled, like we were expecting this to be forever, but it wasn't of ours and ourselves. So when you create that within yourself, now you don't have to look for it in anybody else. And that's where you break that sort of emotional connection, because you're like, oh, I was connected to you because I thought I needed something from you. But now that I've developed it within myself, I don't need people to do this. I can do this by myself. I can figure this out by myself. And it's a period, because it takes time to like, I had to put myself in situations. I had to walk away from certain situations when I was recognizing like this was happening in those environments, when I recognized that somebody was trying to make me and put me in a position where I didn't want to be. This is people who, I've had this in a workplace where a boss didn't want me to see my value because they didn't want to pay me my value. I've seen this in relationships where there are people that are less developed than me, less experienced, and they want to pretend like they've got more or the same to offer me. And so they'll play a certain way, and you'll know this is somebody who's doing this because they're not consistent and they can't be in your life consistently. And that's different than, like, I had this guy who was married and had a thing for me, and I did not feel that way with him. And so what he tried to do is every day ask me about my lunch. Every day he tried to create scenarios where I would need him and his help. And he didn't just do it to me, he did it to everybody, but everybody was fine because they were emotionally dependent upon him too. And so, like, to me, I was like, I noticed something going on there and something felt off. And I said, so I started to distance myself, and he did not like that. And at the time when I didn't know exactly who he was, I didn't think it was an issue talking about how I was creating, a side hustle for myself. And and I was becoming healthier in my body. Like, I would talk, when I did talk about my food, I was talking about, like, when I was doing carnivore and things like that. And so when he saw that I was improving my life, he came in, and that's when he was sexually abusive, and it took me out. And I also, but it was the value of that situation was when I went to go report him to my superiors, the management and the boss, like, they were backing him too. So it also gave me a lot of clarity about what was happening in that environment and why I was feeling so drained and tired, because I was tolerating abuse, and that is exhausting. And so these emotions, why you're so emotional, is because you have belief systems or lack of belief in yourself that you don't think you can, make better decisions or keep it moving. And that's why the settling does have to do with this video, because, like, you settle into something, and if you're still tolerating abuse in some sort of level, you're going to feel that, and it's going to be exhausting. And so if you can't show up in your full version, and you can't speak your full truth, and you can't be your authentic self, it's not your spot. So you got to keep it moving. And so, like, that's where I recognize, like, in my lowest points, I was the most emotional. And when I started taking my power back, that's really when I started releasing those emotions, but also not picking them back up again. Because anytime you suppress your emotions, you've got to express them. And so, like, that's where not only do you have the emotions tied in there, but you've also got to bring in the clarity. And the clarity is the logic. The clarity is the numbers. This is like thinking that you're staying in a job to pay your bills, but realizing the job that you're using, you think, oh, I make so much money. Like, I used to work for the post office, right? But, like, it was really hard on my body, and it was really hard on my mind. So people are like, oh, you make a lot of money, but, like, in reality, a lot of it's being taxed, and a lot of it is going back into food, because you're exhausting your body, like, by walking for large amounts of the day, right? And out in the extreme weather without a bathroom always, like, there's some, like, it's not easy labor, right? And so, like, you think, okay, you've got that top dollar of what you're making, now you got to remove the fact that when you get home you're exhausted, so remove time with your kids. Then you got to think about, they only pay you so much for shoes and protective gear, so now you've got to invest in that, because they only pay, like, maybe a quarter of that. And then you got to think, living in these environments, there's a lack of curiosity and creativity, and you're doing the same thing every day usually. And so now you got to take that, like, you have to numb your mind in order to, fit in. And there's just a lot of things that are tied into some of these jobs and these relationships, where when you look at the bottom line, you're actually now in the red instead of, like, investing and accumulating. And so I've had to look at that with relationships, but also, like, jobs and even environments and things like that, where it feels like I'm receiving something, but am I really? Because, like, I'm losing something. And sometimes what that looks like also is, like, growth. And so, like, just because someone is giving you something doesn't mean you always have to take it. And just because something is offered doesn't mean it's also helpful. And also, there are some times where you have to recognize, like, yes, I needed this help, but only for a period of time, because it was meant to be a season, not a lifetime. And so some people can get really stuck in, like, well, this is helping me, and this is, but it wasn't. But some people live off that instead of, like, use it to, like, get to a better place. And so emotions for me, in the beginning, I was very emotional, and I would have described myself as an empath. And to me, I'm revising that label, because I feel like an empath isn't such a flex, because for me, what that means is I'm leading with my emotions instead of my sort of mentality, I guess, if that would be the right word, like a logical mind. Like, and I think you do kind of have to mix the two. And I think, just because if I'm, see, the thing with logic, if you're heavy in your logic too, that's when you're too material based. That's when you do stay in things for the wrong reasons because you don't think you have the money to get out of them. And I found that, when I was when I was losing money, I had to look at how I was spending money, why I was spending money, where it was going. How did it make me feel when I was in debt? It felt heavier than having that impulsive thing. And so when I started looking at these things, it started allowing me to slow myself down and create the pause and the impulsiveness. And so, like, emotions are impulsive, fast energy. So if you're doing something impulsive, it's to feel good, but it's like that dopamine hit. And I don't have all the terms, but I just know, like, sometimes that feel good fast are not necessarily like a long-term benefit. And so I had to, like, really cut ties with that, but also the people that were tied into that too, because I just had friends where, like, you know what, whenever I've been looking for a relationship, for me it was always about, like, I was looking for a long-term partner that I could build with. I was looking for financial support, but also like emotional support, and like I wanted a person to work with. And what I was receiving was like men that needed me to take care of them and didn't know how to take care of me. So it was always very heavy and burdened. And to be honest, like, I haven't met a man that has not um, shown me that sort of dynamic. But I also am not fully healed, so like I just feel like I haven't reached that level within myself, so I haven't reached that man in their self, if that makes sense. And so that's also kind of tied into settling. Like, if you keep yourself stuck and short kind of thing, you gotta keep yourself growing so you can attain that true, like, it is out there. And I think even if I don't meet a person, I'm gonna be okay because I have my things that create simple joy. I'm still aware. I'm grateful for what I have, but I'm still aware that I can get more, and I'm gonna work for more, right? And and so the emotions show up when I feel like I'm stuck, and when I feel like I've reached a dead end, and I feel like I've reached my when I get growing pains, the emotions come out because I feel like I'm being forced to make a move that I don't feel ready for, but I am. I need to take this. I need to grow. It's kind of like working out. Like, you start working out, you start with walking, kind of moving your body, and you can't go 0 to 90 or else you're going to pull muscle and you're going to be out for a long time, and you're going to have to, stretch that out before you can use it again potentially, right? So, like, I look at my life where, like, I'm growing gradually. And there can be times during that growth where it's frustrating because you can see other people that grow more quickly, but you got to understand, like, those people are taking a different path. Those people could be in a more codependent connection. Those people may be winning right now, but in the long term, like for me, I believe in, like, health is your wealth, and wealth is health. Like, they're tied in together. So there's a lot of people who have money, may have more money than me, but you can see that they're very unhealthy. And so, like, they don't respect their body or their health, and that can be kind of like a God complex, thinking like they're just, they can do whatever they want and they're never going to have any sort of repercussions or actions. But it just shows up differently. So, like, for me, the more time I put into myself, invest in my health and things like that, then I'm going to have a longer life to achieve the goals that I want. So some people will be like, well, I have to do this right now because you only live once, and I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait. I want what I want when I want it. And so, like, I know some people will settle with a partner earlier in life, and even after they've had a separation, they think, well, I found this great person because they're better than this person, but, like, they're not the best. And so some people will settle and, like, wonder why they're still miserable and unhappy. It's like because you settled without all your preferences. You settled for something that you thought was safe, but you weren't really, like, you kind of got the ick factor where you're like, I'm just not into them. And it's because you made that decision out of settling instead of, like, waiting and growing yourself and being able to recognize, like, this is the person that I actually am matched with. Like, this is for me thinking, like, I need someone with a curious mind and discernment and strength to hold boundaries with other people. Because if I'm holding boundaries for myself, and I don't receive messages from men, I don't sit there and, like, I don't mind being friendly to someone's face, but I'm not making connections with men, because for me that's just a lot of men that are looking for those kind of friendships without sort of any intention, they seem lost, and those aren't leaders for me. And so I'm looking for someone who I can invest in, and that can invest in me. And if I haven't found that, then I have to keep going. And I want to be better with my money so that I'm not making those decisions based out of finances and the lack of, and I want to make sure that I can make my own money so that I don't ever get stuck in sort of like a codependent dynamic like that, where that was what happened in the past. That's what my mother did. That's what my family members have done, is they get stuck. That's what people have done. And so a lot of that is not only a lot of people can have money, so it's not necessarily about the financial stability, but it could be also about like they can't spend time by themselves because they don't know how to self-soothe themselves. They don't know how to like rest and sit in the quiet and sit by themselves. They really are clingy to people. And this is like, even if you're by yourself but you're always reaching out through the internet, that can be a sign where like that's not true hermit mode. Hermit mode is like you're growing and you're becoming a different person. You're not just like tolerating silence because no one's reaching out to you. That's like, you need to be growing during that period as well. And so while I keep choosing me instead of codependent dynamics and connections and environments, that's where I'm growing the most. And that's where I'm becoming more emotionally balanced, because I'm recognizing like all these times I say no to them, I'm saying yes to me. And when I say yes to me, that's developing my self-love, my confidence, because I'm doing things by myself. I'm finding a way. I'm doing it. Whether it's like how I want to do it in my mind, it's not maybe showing up like that way, like perfectly, but I'm doing it. And then I look at like other people that do things and they're not perfect and they're still successful. So it's allowed me to really manage my belief systems. And then it also, the emotion in it is I have to grieve what I didn't receive, and look how, like, I was never taught this. So now when I'm learning it, the emotions come up, but it's because it's this was meant to happen with a safety net of a kind, nurturing, patient, yet disciplined and accountable teacher. But now I'm having to do it all by myself, where I'm having to pay my bills and create the safety and security. I'm here to, learn things that my parents didn't learn, and now I have to teach, and they didn't teach me that. So now I have to do that, and then I have to also try to teach it to my kids as they're growing. So there's a lot happening for you, and that's why a lot of the emotions are coming up too, because it's too much. And so like when that emotion is too much, then I look at what can I remove from my plate, because I'm doing too much at once. And like as a child, there shouldn't have ever been like expectations of you like doing all these things as a child. You're just meant to grow and let you grow. But your parents put all these expectations of you need to behave like this in order for us to be portrayed like this. And I need you to sit there and listen to all my bullshit and burdens, because I don't know how to emotionally regulate myself, and I don't know how to ask for help. So I'm going to put it on someone that I feel comfortable, because this person is under my care and under my codependence. And so there are things like you're having to like process while you grow. And so if you stay stuck, you never get that squeeze that's suppressed, like a coal to a piece of coal to diamond, because you're just still convincing yourself like I'm growing. But like if you're in the same boat doing the same damn thing, you maybe just be going in circles instead of getting to a new island, if that makes sense. And so emotions can help you. But if you haven't seen a change and effect in like how you respond emotionally, then you could just be making excuses. And that's where excuses are excuses for you and excuses for other people. And I had to recognize part of my settling was like and the settling was tied into the emotions, and I am just saying it differently but still behaving the same and expecting different results. And like that's really hard, because we all have blind spots, but your blind spots are like your family's blind spots, which are your norms. But now you're starting to see something different, and that's a challenge too, because like I can't go back to people of the past because they're not willing to see how those patterns were their blind spots. And when I called out their blind spots, they get very triggered and defensive. And for me, I run towards a trigger, and a lot of people run away from them. That's how you get results. You go towards the thing, you ask the why, you ask the hard questions, you come in touch with the painful truth as to why your life is the way it is. And if you come up with excuses, or if you're waiting on some sort of spiritual epiphany, if you're waiting on some sort of like lottery ticket or someone to come save you, you're going to be waiting a long time. And which waiting means wasting. And there are times where waiting is helpful, where you're resting, but while I'm resting, I'm also getting a lot of answers. If you're just waiting and you're bored, boredom is a sign like, yes, you need to sit there and get some answers, but like if you're constantly bored, then do something. Take some action towards something, because boredom is some of these things happen, but like when, depending on when they happen, it's important to listen when they happen. Boredom over a period of long time can now become unfulfilling, because you're like, okay, well, you know, I just don't think I can do something right now, so I need this to happen before I can do that. Well, that's called faith. You put something into action before you have all the answers, and you're going to learn a lot from that. And I have learned a lot from that, and when I didn't think I would be caught, I learned how to catch myself. I learned how to look at answers. Not to say that like there isn't something I'm working with. I believe I'm co-creating with something out there, but at the same time, a lot of this I've had to take more creative sort of action over, and just went out and gone after things, because part of the spiritual community would teach me like, oh, just sit and wait for things to happen and manifest. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm sick of waiting. I would wait around for people to choose me. I would wait around for people, like opportunities to come to me, and that's where I feel like that spirituality is kind of not helpful at times, because it's like the waiting. When I go out there, I see where I'm at action wise. So like if I put myself out there, let's just say when I was looking for someone a year or so ago, and I thought I was ready to date, I realized, you know what, I'm still emotionally unavailable because I've taken on too many grievances. And so I was still attracting people who were not, and I was still insecure. And so I was still attracting insecure, emotionally unavailable people. And that's not to say like I've had that in the past where they're more opportunistic. This person did not seem opportunistic, but they also weren't available. And I don't know that they were like a match. You know what I mean? And so there are things like I had to put myself in action to kind of get a gauge on where I was. But some people just sit there and they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then they get angry because their life is not turning out, and then they get angry at other people who were like, I'm taking the risk. You know, I get a lot of envy from men and women because like I'm not willing to tolerate like their lack mindset and the lack of action, and they're expecting me to just carry them along or like partner up with them so they get some sort of benefit from my energy that I've created, and I'm not willing to tolerate their excuses or their bullshit, like, because I'm accountable for mine. No one's paying off no one's carrying me. Nobody's saying like, you know what, hey, I want to match with you and I want to bring you up here. Nobody's doing that. I have to get up there by myself. I have to take the step to put myself up there and out there, and it's hard, it's challenging, and yeah. So I think I know I'm getting to a better place when I get less emotionally reactive to not just other people's actions and their bullshit and their abuse, but also to my own bullshit and abuse. And so like I know I'm learning the lesson. I can see that lesson as a blessing when less emotions are showing up and I get more insight. So like when you start moving from overly emotional to more like, okay, this is frustrating right now. I don't like the feeling of this, but I know that I'm doing what I need to do to get to where I'm going. It's very different than this sucks, life sucks, I'm doing nothing. You know, so you got to pay attention to what you're telling yourself, how to speak to yourself in moments of challenge, and that's how I removed a lot of the emotions, is because like I learned that these lessons are a blessing because I need to become more independent, because we can consider ourselves very independent as soon as you move out of your parents' house and move into your own apartment. Independent, right? But are you? Because you're like, depending on what that looks like and how you're making your money, if someone and something still has a level of control over you, I mean, you can only go to so far. You know, we do have governments and things like that, but I think it's meant to be looked at as like a 75 percentage. You know, you can do more if you can still, you got more growing room. And so unfortunately sometimes people will think like, I just got this job and it pays all my bills and I got a marriage and I'm like in my 20s and I'm set, and that can feel really good. Because when you've been controlled for so long and you finally get to take a chance to make a decision, you're like, well, I did this, and the fact that I got to actually make a decision instead of being micromanaged and controlled by my parents, this feels like a big step. But it's just the first step, meant to be partnered with many more steps. But some people really get stuck in that one step. And this is the problem with parents who are micromanaging and controlling their kids and abusing their kids and coddling their kids, but also like dumping on their kids. Is like, you need to develop this as a child, so when the disconnect from the child and the parent happens, it doesn't feel like a big step of independence, because your kid has already had independence up to that point. You've given yourself, your kids, that choice. You know, you've let them decide what they want to wear to school, whether it may, you know, a lot of parents are like, I don't want my kids showing up at school like that with different socks, with this and that. Why? What does that matter? Like, they're learning, they're growing. Like, we're making a mess. making a mess means growth. You have to make a mess before you can clear things up. It's like you have a room of miscellaneous things. You have to pull it all apart before you can organize it back in, right? And so a lot of people don't want to make a mess. And yet they're having messy emotions, and they're having messy patterns, and they're having messy lifestyles. Their house could be sparkling clean, but internally they are a mess. Like, I used to date this guy, and like his house was cleaner than mine, so I thought he knew something more than me. And literally, this man was sleeping with other women all the time, and he could not tell the truth to save his life. And yet he referred to me as I'm one of his best friends. And yet he's treating me like a piece of trash. So you got to understand, sometimes, like I said, like I've had to learn where emotions are impulsive, and logic and clarity take time. So like, stop jumping into shit. I mean, the times I've had to jump out of things where it was like the pressure was building. And then now when I'm like, I see something, I'm like, I remove myself, because I'm like, I like to give, I tend to give people too many chances, and I tend to give too much of a doubt. But I'm learning through my experiences where I can revise that, and where I no longer need to invest in people anymore, because I can see it before. And before, I used to have to also look at what are my judgments, because some of my judgments were filtering that sort of like safe and unsafe category. And so I had to look at that too, because I'm like, you know what, I've let other people's belief systems kind of blur that. And these are all just things that happen when you put yourself out there in the action, so you can learn it for yourself instead of take on someone else's opinion. And the emotions come from other people's opinions instead of your own action. Once you get your own life experience, you can make a decision for yourself, and that means you make independent choices, which means you have independent accountability and repercussions to the choices that you make. So like, if that's being removed and you can just make a mess all you want, but no one's actually holding you accountable, that's it's gonna get you stuck. You're gonna have to clean up that mess sometime or another. A lot of people like to sweep that shit under the rug and pretend like they're the perfect person out in the society. A lot of these people are in high status positions, and they pretend like their shit don't stink, but it's because they've covered it up with a rug, and we can't smell it right now. But when you pull up that rug full of bullshit, that's going to be a mess to clean up. So be sure to pay attention to your emotions. So I'm going to end that one here. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're finding this helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, and thanks for watching.